I buried my husband, believing grief would be the hardest thing I'd face. I was wrong. When I came home from his funeral, another woman was sleeping in my bed. My daughter-in-law looked at me and said, "This is my house now." And that was the moment I realized my loss had been planned long before his death. Before I begin, I want to say this gently. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, if grief opened a door for cruelty instead of comfort, please leave a comment, and subscribe to Voice of Legends. Your stories matter too. I never imagined that the quiet after my husband's funeral would be louder than the service itself, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest until breathing feels like work. That morning, the sky had been a pale, apologetic gray, as if even the weather knew it had overstayed its welcome. I remember sitting in the back seat of my sister's car, my black coat folded stiffly around me, my hands clasped in my lap like they were holding something fragile that might shatter if I loosened my grip. For 38 years, I had been someone's wife. That day, I became something else, though I didn't yet have a name for it. The burial was simple. My husband, Thomas, never liked fuss. He was the kind of man who fixed broken hinges before you noticed they squeaked, who brought home groceries without being asked, who believed a house wasn't a house unless it held peace. Standing by his grave, listening to the minister speak about devotion and legacy, I felt hollowed out, like the words were echoing through a place that used to be full. Our son, Michael, stood beside his wife, Lauren. She wore oversized sunglasses and held his arm tightly, her nails pressing into his sleeve. I remember thinking she looked tense, not sad exactly, but alert, like someone waiting for a cue. Afterward, there were hugs, murmured condolences, the strange social choreography of grief. People telling me Thomas was in a better place, as if that knowledge could possibly outweigh the fact that I wasn't. I barely remember the drive home. My sister insisted I stay with her for a few nights, but all I wanted was my own bed, my own walls, the familiar creaks and smells that still carried my husband's presence. I wanted to sit in the silence we had built together, even if it hurt. The house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a place Thomas and I bought when Michael was still in elementary school. We planted the maple tree in the front yard the year he graduated. Thomas used to joke that the house grew with our son, and now, standing in the driveway days later, suitcase in hand, I noticed how tall that tree had become. Too tall, maybe. Its branches cast long shadows across the front windows, and for a moment I hesitated, my key heavy in my palm. The front door was unlocked. That should have been the first warning, but grief dulls instincts the way fog dulls headlights. I stepped inside and stopped cold. The air smelled different. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Vanilla and something floral, a sweetness that didn't belong to me or Thomas. Shoes sat neatly by the door, women's shoes I didn't recognize, smaller than mine, newer. A handbag rested on the console table, and where my family photo used to sit was a small decorative bowl filled with keys. I called out Michael's name first, my voice thin and uncertain, then Lauren's. No answer. I walked farther in, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors Thomas had refinished himself one summer, refusing help because he said some things deserved patience. The house looked rearranged, the couch angled differently, my throw blanket folded and placed aside, replaced by pillows I'd never bought. On the wall where Thomas's old fishing photo hung, there was now a minimalist print with a quote about new beginnings. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy rhythm that didn't match the confusion racing through my mind. I told myself it was temporary, that maybe Michael and Lauren were staying a few days to help, that I was imagining things because loss does strange things to perception. I set my suitcase down and walked toward the bedroom. My bedroom. It was closed. I stood there longer than I want to admit, my hand hovering inches from the knob. This room had been the center of my married life. It was where Thomas and I whispered plans late at night, where we argued and forgave, where I held his hand as illness thinned him into someone smaller but no less dear. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The bed was made with different sheets, not the pale blue ones I'd washed before the funeral, but crisp white with decorative pillows stacked like they belonged in a catalog. My dresser was cleared except for a few items pushed to one side. On the nightstand sat a charging phone, its screen lighting up with a notification I couldn't read from where I stood. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt something inside me go very still. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. Lauren stood in the doorway, her hair combed back neatly, her face composed in a way that made my stomach tighten. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said lightly, as if I was the unexpected one. "You're back already." I asked her what she was doing in my bedroom. I asked her where Michael was. My voice sounded far away to my own ears, like it belonged to someone else. She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Michael went out to run some errands," she said. Then, after a pause that felt deliberate, she added, "We moved in while you were gone." Moved in. The words landed with a dull thud. "This is my house," I said. It was the only thing that made sense to say. Lauren tilted her head, studying me. "Actually," she replied, calm as anything, "Michael gave it to me." I laughed then, a short, startled sound that surprised us both. "That's not funny," I said. "I just buried my husband." Her expression didn't change. "I know," she said, "and I'm sorry for your loss, truly, but things are different now." I remember the way the room seemed to shrink, how the walls felt closer, the air heavier. Different how, I wanted to ask, but the answer was already forming in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't confusion, this was confidence, and confidence like that doesn't come from nowhere. I told her she was mistaken. I told her Michael couldn't give away a house that wasn't his. I told her I needed to sit down. She stepped aside, gesturing toward a chair that hadn't been there before, as if offering me a seat in my own life. "You should rest," she said. "We can talk when Michael gets back." Rest. In that moment, I understood something important, even if I couldn't yet put it into words. Whatever this was, whatever plan had been set in motion, it hadn't started after my husband died. It had only been waiting. I sat on the edge of that unfamiliar chair and tried to steady my breathing, telling myself that panic would only give her more control. Lauren moved around the room with an ease that felt practiced, opening drawers, straightening things that didn't need straightening, acting like this was already her territory. Every small movement felt like an insult layered on top of my grief. I wanted Michael home immediately, wanted him to explain this misunderstanding, to laugh it off and apologize for the shock. But another part of me, quieter and colder, wondered why he hadn't warned me at all. When Michael finally walked through the front door, his voice carried down the hall before I saw him. He sounded normal, too normal. He called my name, then stopped short when he saw me sitting there, my coat still on, my eyes fixed on him. His face flickered with something I couldn't read quickly enough. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance. He glanced at Lauren, and she gave him a small nod, almost imperceptible, like a signal. "Mom," he said carefully, "you're home." I stood up, my knees trembling despite my effort to stay composed. "Michael," I said, "why is your wife sleeping in my bed?" The question hung between us, heavy and undeniable. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture he'd had since childhood whenever he was caught doing something he shouldn't. He avoided my eyes. "We thought it would be easier this way," he said. Easier for whom? I wanted to scream, but I waited. Lauren stepped in before he could say more. "Your house is too big for you now," she said, her tone reasonable, almost kind. "And you're grieving. You don't need the stress of upkeep. Michael and I talked about it, and it just made sense for us to move in." "Move in?" I repeated. "You don't just move into someone else's home." Michael finally looked at me then, his eyes tired, defensive. "Mom, Dad wanted this," he said. "He told me before he passed." The room went very quiet. I stared at my son, searching his face for some sign of shame or doubt, but he looked convinced, or at least committed to the story he was telling. "Your father never said that to me, not once." "He didn't want to upset you," he said quickly. "He knew it would be hard for you to let go." Let go? Of the house Thomas and I had built together? Of the last physical place where his presence still lingered? My hands clenched at my sides. "So you decided for me," I said, "while I was burying him." Lauren sighed softly as if I were being unreasonable. "There's paperwork," she said. "It's all legal." That word sent a chill through me. Paperwork. I asked to see it. Michael hesitated and then nodded. He left the room and returned with a thin folder, handing it to me like it might burn. I opened it slowly, my eyes scanning pages that blurred together at first. Deeds, signatures, dates. My husband's name written at the bottom of a document I had never seen before, transferring ownership to Michael. My heart hammered painfully. I knew Thomas's handwriting better than my own. Something about the signature felt off, too neat, too forced. But doubt crept in anyway, sharp and cruel. Had he really done this without telling me? Had I missed something in those final months when illness consumed so much of our attention? "I need time," I said quietly, closing the folder. "I just lost my husband. You can't expect me to accept this today." Lauren crossed her arms again. "We're not kicking you out immediately," she said. "You can stay in the guest room for now, but this is our home, legally. We need to start setting boundaries." The words hit harder than any shout could have. Guest room? Boundaries? In my own house? Michael stood there silently, letting his wife draw lines around me like I was a problem to be managed. I realized then that whatever loyalty I expected from him was already gone. That night, I lay awake on a narrow bed in the guest room, staring at a ceiling I had painted myself years ago. Sleep wouldn't come. Every sound of the house felt wrong. Footsteps where there shouldn't be, voices muffled through walls that once felt safe. I thought of Thomas, of how he used to squeeze my hand when something felt off and whisper, "We'll figure it out." I had never felt more alone. The next morning I called my sister and told her everything. She was furious in a way I couldn't afford to be yet. She urged me to leave immediately, to get a lawyer, to stop trusting explanations that didn't add up. I promised I would, but first I needed answers. I needed to understand how my life had been rearranged without my consent. Over the next few days, I watched Lauren closely. She reorganized cabinets, replaced photos, talked about renovations. She spoke about the house in the future tense, as if my presence were temporary by design. Michael deferred to her on everything, nodding along, avoiding my gaze. Each interaction confirmed what my heart already suspected. This hadn't been a sudden decision made in grief. This was planned. I began quietly gathering my own documents, old tax records, bank statements, anything that might show inconsistencies. Late one afternoon, while Lauren was out, I went into the home office Thomas and I used to share. The desk drawers were locked, but I found the spare key taped inside a cookbook in the kitchen, right where Thomas always kept it. My hand shook as I opened the drawer. Inside was a file labeled Estate. I had never seen it before. As I flipped through the contents, my breath caught. Drafts of wills, notes in Thomas's handwriting expressing concern about Michael's financial pressure. A letter, unfinished, addressed to me, apologizing for something he feared might happen if he didn't act quickly enough. Tears blurred my vision as realization settled in. Thomas hadn't planned to give the house away. He'd been trying to protect me. Protect me. Whatever document Michael showed me, whatever signature sat at the bottom of that page, it didn't tell the full story. And for the first time since the funeral, my grief began to shift into something else, something steadier, something sharper. Resolve. I read Thomas's unfinished letter over and over until the words etched themselves into me. He wrote about feeling pressured, about Michael's growing demands, about Lauren's insistence that everything be settled before it was too late. He apologized for not telling me sooner, for trying to handle things quietly so I wouldn't worry while he was sick. The last line trailed off mid-sentence, the ink fading where his strength must have failed him. I pressed the paper to my chest and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to at the funeral, deep and shaking, the kind of sobbing that empties you out. When I finally calmed, I knew two things with certainty. Thomas had never willingly given away our home, and whatever Michael and Lauren were doing, they were counting on my grief to keep me silent. I made copies of everything in that file, my hands careful and deliberate. I returned the originals exactly where I found them. That night at dinner, I said very little, listening instead. Lauren talked about repainting the living room and renting out the basement for extra income. Michael nodded along, barely looking at me. I wondered when my son had learned to value convenience over conscience and whether I had missed the moment it happened. The next morning, I called an attorney a friend had recommended years earlier. Her voice was calm, measured, the kind of voice that steadies you when your world feels unbalanced. I told her everything, from the funeral to the forged-looking signature. She listened without interrupting, then asked me to bring in every document I had. When I mentioned the letter Thomas left, her tone shifted slightly. "Do not move out," she said firmly, "and do not let them intimidate you." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Living under the same roof as people trying to erase you is a strange kind of torture. Lauren grew bolder as the days passed. She corrected me when I referred to rooms as mine. She invited friends over without asking. Once, she suggested I look into senior living communities, her voice coded in false concern. Michael stayed distant, always busy, always tired. I realized he was avoiding me because deep down, he knew what he was doing was wrong. One evening, while washing dishes, I overheard Lauren on the phone in the living room. She didn't know I was within earshot. She spoke in a low, urgent voice, complaining about how slow I was, how I refused to leave. "We did everything right," she said. "The papers are signed. She doesn't have a leg to stand on." My grip tightened on the edge of the sink. We did everything right. Not Michael, not my family. We. I began keeping a small notebook hidden in my purse, documenting everything. Dates, conversations, changes to the house, every offhand comment that revealed their assumptions. Grief had made me quiet, but it had also made me observant. When the attorney reviewed the documents, she confirmed what my instincts already knew. The deed transfer was suspicious, the signature showed signs of tracing, and most importantly, the document had been notarized on a day Thomas had been hospitalized and heavily medicated, a day he couldn't have been at the notary's office. "That doesn't mean this will be quick," she warned me, "but it does mean you have a case." I left her office feeling lighter than I had in weeks, but as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something new. a real estate sign staked into my front lawn. I sat in my car staring at it, my chest tight with disbelief. They were preparing to sell my home while I still lived in it. I walked inside slowly, my mind racing. Lauren was in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone. When I asked her about the sign, she didn't even look up. "It's just an option," she said. "We're exploring possibilities." "You had no right," I replied, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. She finally met my eyes, her expression cool. "You don't own the house anymore," she said. "You should start accepting that." That night, I called my attorney again. She told me to take pictures, to document everything, and to prepare myself. "They're trying to force you out, and they're underestimating you." The court filing happened faster than I expected. Papers were served. Lauren's confidence cracked for the first time when she realized this wasn't going to be a quiet takeover. Michael avoided me entirely after that, retreating behind work excuses and closed doors. As weeks passed, tension filled every room. Lauren stopped pretending to be kind. She criticized my cooking, my habits, my presence. But something inside me had changed. I no longer saw myself as a burden in my own home. I was a woman defending the last promise my husband made to me, even if he never got to say it out loud. The night before our first hearing, I stood in the living room alone, looking at the walls that had witnessed so much of our life. I whispered to Thomas that I was ready to fight, not just for the house, but for the truth. And for the first time since he died, I felt like he could hear me. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy blouse and the pearl earrings Thomas gave me on our 25th anniversary. I wanted to feel like myself again, not the fragile version Lauren seemed to expect. Michael and Lauren left the house without a word, their silence louder than any argument. I followed later, my sister insisting on driving me, her presence a steady anchor when my nerves threatened to unravel. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. I sat at a long table beside my attorney, my hands folded tightly as if in prayer. When Michael walked in, he still didn't look at me. Lauren did. Her expression was tight, annoyed more than afraid, as though this were an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. When the judge began reviewing the case, my attorney presented the inconsistencies calmly and methodically. The questionable notarization date, the medical records showing Thomas's condition that day, the drafts of wills that contradicted the alleged transfer. As each point was laid out, I watched Michael's posture change. His shoulders slumped slightly, his jaw clenched. Lauren leaned toward her lawyer, whispering urgently. Then came the letter. My attorney asked if she could submit the unfinished note Thomas had written. As she read portions aloud, my throat tightened. His words, spoken in a stranger's voice, filled the room with an intimacy that felt almost sacred. He wrote about fear, about not wanting me to be taken advantage of, about trusting me to stand up for myself if something happened to him. I could feel eyes on me, but I didn't look up. I kept my gaze fixed on the table, my hands steady now, grounded by his memory. Lauren's attorney tried to dismiss the letter as irrelevant, as an emotional artifact rather than legal proof, but the judge listened closely, asking questions, requesting timelines. When it was over, he ruled that the property sale must be halted immediately pending further investigation. The relief was physical. I felt it in my knees and my chest, like air returning after being underwater too long. Back at the house, the atmosphere had shifted. Lauren was quieter, her movements sharper, more abrupt. Michael finally spoke to me that evening, standing awkwardly in the doorway of the guest room. "It didn't think it would go this far," he said. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a man who confused obedience with love. "It went this far the moment you let someone treat your mother like a stranger," I replied. He flinched. "Lauren said it was legal," he murmured. "Legal doesn't mean right, and you know that." The words hung between us, unanswered. Over the next few weeks, the investigation continued. Handwriting experts confirmed what my heart already knew. The signature on the deed had been traced. The notary admitted under questioning that Lauren had brought the document in alone and claimed Thomas was too ill to attend. Each revelation peeled back another layer of the plan they thought would succeed because I was grieving and alone. Lauren grew increasingly hostile as the truth closed in. She accused me of turning the family against her, of ruining her marriage. One night, during a heated argument, she shouted that the house should have been Michael's anyway, that I was old and didn't need so much space. The cruelty of her words stunned even Michael into silence. That was the moment I realized something else. This was never just about property. It was about erasing me. When the final ruling came, I sat alone in the living room waiting for my attorney's call. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in months. When the phone rang, my hands didn't shake this time. The deed transfer was declared fraudulent. Ownership of the house reverted fully to me. I thanked my attorney and ended the call, sitting in stillness as the weight of it settled. I had won, legally, but the cost was clear. My relationship with my son lay fractured, and the woman he chose had shown me exactly who she was. That evening, I asked Michael and Lauren to sit down. I told them they would need to make arrangements to move out. Lauren stared at me in disbelief, then anger. Michael looked torn, his eyes darting between us. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I said quietly. "I'm doing this to protect myself and to honor your father." Lauren stood up abruptly, muttering that she had never felt welcome anyway. Michael hesitated, then followed her out of the room. I listened to their footsteps fade down the hall, feeling both victorious and unbearably sad. The house was mine again, but it was emptier than it had ever been. They moved out within 2 weeks. Lauren packed quickly, angrily, slamming drawers and doors as if the house itself had offended her. Michael moved more slowly, his actions hesitant, as though each box carried the weight of a choice he hadn't fully owned yet. I stayed out of their way, retreating to the living room or the garden, letting the process unfold without interference. I had learned that not every battle required my presence. The day they left, Michael lingered by the front door. Lauren was already outside, tapping on her phone, her back turned. He cleared his throat. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw both the boy I raised and the man he had become standing awkwardly in the space between responsibility and regret. "Intent doesn't erase impact," I replied gently. "I hope you learn that." He nodded, tears welling but unshed, then followed his wife out the door. When the house finally fell silent, I stood there for a long time, listening to the echo of their departure. The silence felt different this time, not heavy, not threatening, just honest. In the weeks that followed, I began reclaiming my space in small, deliberate ways. I put Thomas's fishing photo back on the wall. I washed the unfamiliar sheets and stored them away, remaking the bed with my pale blue set. I moved slowly, allowing memories to surface without drowning in them. Grief, I was learning, didn't disappear when justice arrived. It simply changed shape. Michael called occasionally. The conversations were polite, cautious, as if we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing. Lauren never reached out. I didn't expect her to. Some people exit your life as cleanly as they entered it, leaving behind nothing but disruption and a lesson you didn't ask for. One afternoon, my sister came over with coffee and sat with me on the porch. We watched the maple tree sway gently in the breeze, its leaves beginning to turn. "You know," she said, "Thomas would be proud of you." I smiled softly. "I hope so." As autumn settled in, I found myself thinking less about what had been taken and more about what remained. I still had my home, I still had my memories, and I had learned, painfully but clearly, that love without boundaries invites harm. That lesson had come too late to protect me from betrayal, but not too late to shape the rest of my life. One evening, I sat at Thomas's old desk and finished the letter he never could. I wrote about forgiveness, not as an excuse, but as a release. I wrote about strength discovered under pressure, about grief that sharpened my sense of self rather than dulling it. When I was done, I folded the letter and placed it back in the file, not as evidence, but as closure. Months passed. The house felt like home again. I hosted a small dinner with friends, laughter filling the rooms that had once echoed with tension. I realized then that healing doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly in moments when you realize you're no longer bracing for the next blow. Michael and I are still rebuilding, slowly. Trust, once broken, doesn't snap back into place. It requires patience, honesty, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. I don't know what our relationship will look like in the future, but I know what it won't look like. It won't be built on silence or fear. Looking back now, I understand that the greatest betrayal wasn't just the forged papers or the attempted theft of my home. It was the assumption that my grief made me weak, that I would shrink, retreat, disappear. They underestimated the quiet strength of a woman who had spent decades building a life brick by brick, love by love. This house still stands because I stood with it. And if there is one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Grief may bend you, but it does not erase you. Your voice still matters, your place is still yours, and no one has the right to take your life from you, no matter how vulnerable you seem. As winter approached, the house settled into a slower rhythm, one that matched my own. Mornings were quiet. I made coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching frost gather along the edges of the glass. There were moments when the loneliness pressed in again, unexpected and sharp, especially when I reached for habits Thomas and I had shared without thinking. 2 mugs instead of 1, a comment made out loud with no one there to answer. Healing, I was learning, wasn't a straight line. It looped back on itself, asking you to revisit places you thought you had already survived. Michael's calls became more frequent, though still careful. One afternoon, he asked if we could meet for lunch, just the 2 of us. I agreed, knowing that avoiding the conversation would only let the wound fester. We met at a small diner he used to love as a teenager, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone Hun. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. When our food arrived, he barely touched it. Finally, he sighed and said, "I don't know how I let it happen." I didn't rush to comfort him. This wasn't that kind of moment. "You let it happen because it was easier than saying no," I said, "and because someone convinced you that my needs didn't matter anymore." He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the table. "Lauren said you'd be fine, that you were strong, that you'd land on your feet." I felt a familiar ache, but also clarity. "Strength isn't an invitation to be hurt," I replied, "and love isn't something you put on hold when it's inconvenient." For the first time, he cried, quietly, shoulders shaking, the way he used to when he was a boy overwhelmed by something he couldn't fix. I reached across the table and rested my hand near his, not quite touching. Boundaries, even in compassion. "It's something you'll have to face honestly," I said, without blaming anyone else. When we parted that day, there was no dramatic reconciliation, just a shared understanding that rebuilding would take time and that some consequences couldn't be undone. Back at home, I continued to shape my days with intention. I joined a local walking group. I volunteered at the community library. I filled my calendar with small commitments that reminded me I still belonged to the world beyond my grief. The house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a sanctuary again. One evening, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found a photo album I hadn't seen in years. Pictures of Michael as a child, of Thomas holding him up at the beach, of our family smiling before life complicated things. I sat on the floor and let myself feel both the joy and the sadness without pushing either away. This was my history. It deserved to be remembered honestly. Lauren never returned to the house. From what little I heard, she blamed me for everything, telling friends and relatives that I had turned on them, that I was manipulative and cold. Strangely, her words no longer had power over me. People who truly knew me saw the truth, and those who didn't were not mine to convince. As the first anniversary of Thomas's passing approached, I visited his grave alone. I told him about the case, about standing up for myself, about learning that love sometimes requires firmness. I thanked him for the life we shared and for the quiet lessons he left behind. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter, as if I had finally said goodbye in the way I needed to. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in a year. Spring arrived softly, almost shyly, as if unsure whether it was welcome. I noticed it first in the way the light lingered longer in the evenings, how the air carried a hint of warmth that hadn't been there before. The maple tree in the front yard began to bud again, stubborn and alive, and I found myself standing at the window watching it the way I once watched my son waiting for the school bus. Growth, I realized, doesn't ask permission. It happens when it's ready. Michael and I settled into a fragile but honest rhythm. We spoke every week, sometimes about practical things, sometimes about memories of his father. He apologized more than once, each time sounding a little less defensive and a little more accountable. I didn't rush forgiveness. I let it form slowly, like trust rebuilding itself brick by brick. Some wounds need air before they can close. One afternoon, he came by the house alone. He stood in the doorway, unsure, as if waiting to be invited back into a place he had once belonged. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the living room, the same room where his wife once claimed ownership as if I were invisible. Now it felt different, grounded, mine. I filed for separation, he said quietly. I didn't react right away. This was his life, his reckoning. How do you feel about that? I asked. Relieved, he admitted, and ashamed it took me so long. I nodded. Growth is rarely comfortable, I said, but it's necessary. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on his father's photo, back where it belonged. Dad loved this house, he said. I forgot what it meant. You didn't forget. You let someone else define it for you. We talked for a long time that day, about responsibility, about fear, about how easy it is to mistake silence for peace. When he left, he hugged me, a real hug this time, not rushed or obligatory. I felt something ease inside my chest. Life continued, imperfect but steady. I planted new flowers in the garden. I repainted the guest room, turning it into a space for friends, not exile. I hosted my first holiday gathering since Thomas's death, a modest affair filled with warmth and laughter. For the first time, the house held joy without the shadow of conflict. Occasionally, I thought about Lauren, about how close she came to succeeding, about how easily grief can be exploited when people mistake kindness for weakness. I didn't dwell on her. Some chapters don't deserve rereading. What stayed with me was the lesson that standing up for yourself doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you love yourself enough to refuse erasure. It means teaching others how to treat you, even when it's uncomfortable. One evening, as I locked up the house and turned off the lights, I paused in the hallway outside my bedroom. I thought about the moment I opened that door after the funeral and saw my life rearranged without my consent. That version of me felt distant now, not because the pain was gone, but because I had grown around it. I stepped into the room and closed the door gently behind me. There are moments when you realize you've crossed an invisible line, when life no longer feels like something happening to you, but something you are actively shaping again. For me, that realization came quietly on an ordinary afternoon while I was folding laundry in the sunlit living room. The radio played softly in the background, a song Thomas used to hum without knowing the words, and instead of the familiar ache, I felt warmth. Not happiness exactly, peace. Michael began coming by more often, always calling first, always respectful of the boundaries we were rebuilding together. He helped me fix a loose step on the back porch and trim the hedges, small acts that felt symbolic in ways neither of us spoke aloud. We were learning how to be mother and son again, not through grand apologies, but through consistency. One day, while we were working in the yard, he stopped suddenly and said, "I don't think I ever thanked you for not giving up on me." I leaned on my rake and looked at him. "I didn't give up," I said, "but I also didn't disappear. There's a difference." He nodded, absorbing that. I could see him changing slowly, painfully, but genuinely. Accountability does that to a person. It strips away excuses and leaves you with choices. Later that week, a letter arrived, addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. It was Lauren. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, unsure what I felt. Curiosity, maybe, or closure. Inside was a short note, no apology, no warmth, just a cold explanation of how she felt wronged, how she believed the house should have gone to Michael, how I had made things difficult. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer without responding. Some conversations don't deserve continuation. As summer approached, I decided to make a change I'd been putting off for years. I donated many of Thomas's clothes, keeping only a few meaningful pieces. Letting go felt different now, less like loss, more like gratitude. I wasn't erasing him. I was making space for the life I still had. I also started telling my story, carefully, to women in my walking group, to friends who had faced their own quiet betrayals. I watched their faces as they listened, recognition softening into strength. There was power in speaking aloud what had once been used against me, power in refusing to carry shame that wasn't mine. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip low behind the houses, I realized something important. The house wasn't just mine because a court said so. It was mine because I claimed my place in it again, because I refused to be pushed aside by grief or guilt or fear. Thomas used to say that home is where you're allowed to take up space. For a long time, I forgot that included me. Now, every room held that truth again.
As the year turned, I found myself thinking less about what had happened and more about who I had become because of it. The story no longer replayed in my mind with the same sharp edges. It had softened into something reflective, a reminder rather than a wound. That, I realized, was healing in its truest form. Michael and I marked the holidays together quietly. No big gatherings, no forced cheer, just shared meals, memories spoken carefully, and an understanding that rebuilding trust is not about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about learning from it. We talked openly about his marriage, about the mistakes he made in the name of keeping peace, and how that peace was never real to begin with. One afternoon, he surprised me by bringing over a small framed photo of Thomas and me, taken years ago on a road trip neither of us remembered planning. "I found this in a box," he said. "I thought it belonged here." I took the frame and felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you," I said. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. It told me he was finally seeing the house the way his father and I had always seen it, as a place of continuity, not conquest. I began mentoring at the community center, speaking to women who were navigating late life transitions, divorce, widowhood, family estrangement. I didn't present myself as an expert, just as someone who had survived something unexpected. Again and again, I heard the same quiet fear echoed back to me, the fear of becoming invisible, the fear of being replaced. I told them what I had learned the hard way, that dignity is not granted by others, it's claimed, that boundaries are not punishments, they are protections, and that grief does not make you weak, it makes you human. Occasionally, I still dream of Thomas. In the dreams, he is always calm, always smiling softly, as if reassuring me without words. When I wake, the sadness is gentler now, woven with gratitude rather than loss alone. Loving him changed me, losing him tested me, but standing up for myself honored both of us. The house continues to age with me. The maple tree sheds its leaves and grows them back again. The walls hold new laughter layered over old memories. I've learned that permanence doesn't come from possession alone. It comes from presence, from refusing to leave your own life just because someone else tries to push you out. Looking back, I see clearly now what I couldn't see then. The betrayal hurt deeply, yes, but it also forced me to confront something essential. My worth was never dependent on being a wife, or a mother, or even a homeowner. It was inherent, unshakable. And once I understood that, everything else fell into place.
The months after the legal victory were quieter, but the quiet was different now. It wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was steady, a space where I could breathe without fear or doubt. I began to appreciate the small rhythms of life again, the morning light spilling across the kitchen floor, the scent of fresh bread baking, the soft creak of the staircase as I went up to bed. It was in these moments that I understood how much of myself I had lost to grief and betrayal, and how much I could reclaim simply by living intentionally. Michael visited less often now, but when he did, it was meaningful. One afternoon, he brought his guitar, the one Thomas had taught him to play, and played a simple melody on the porch. I sat in the rocking chair, letting the notes drift through the warm air, and for a moment I felt a profound sense of continuity. Thomas's presence wasn't gone. It lived in the house, in the music, in the memories we carried forward. I realized that no court ruling could have given me what I now held, a reclaiming of my life, my space, my identity. I found myself thinking about Lauren less and less. At first, every sound of shoes on hardwood, every new photo or rearranged shelf had made my chest tighten with dread. But over time, I saw her less as a looming threat and more as a lesson etched into the structure of my days. She had tried to erase me, but her attempts only revealed the strength I hadn't realized I possessed. Sometimes I even imagined sending her a letter, not out of desire for confrontation, but to release whatever lingering tension remained. Instead, I wrote in my journal, recording thoughts and reflections, letting them carry away the remnants of anger I didn't want to feed. The house itself became a sanctuary again. I started redecorating slowly, not to erase the past, but to assert my presence. Each piece of furniture I returned to its rightful place, each framed photo I hung, was a small declaration of ownership beyond legalities. My late husband's fishing trophies found their spots on the shelves, the corners of the room filled with the warmth of memories rather than silence. I hosted friends for dinner, neighbors for tea, and the house welcomed each guest with the same calm, steadfast energy I felt returning to myself. One morning, I received a call from a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She had heard the story in fragments and wanted to check on me. We spoke for an hour, trading updates, sharing laughter, even sharing tears. It struck me how isolation can compound grief, how betrayal can make you doubt your place in the world, and how human connection, even in small doses, rebuilds that sense of belonging. I promised myself I would not retreat again, that I would reach out, nurture relationships, and participate fully in the life that remained. Michael called one evening after work, voice hesitant but soft. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking. I want to start over, not just with you, but with myself. I want to live honestly, without fear of manipulation or avoidance." I felt a warmth in my chest, a mixture of hope and caution. "Start over is a choice," I said, "and the first step is always acknowledging what went wrong. Then you decide what you want to build next." He agreed, and I could hear the sincerity in his tone, the first real clarity I'd sensed from him in months. I also began to recognize the quiet transformations within myself. I no longer flinched at sudden noises in the night. I no longer doubted my instincts or my ability to stand firm when challenged. The grief that had once consumed me now felt like a companion I had learned to respect rather than a cage. Each day I could feel my confidence growing, tempered by humility, shaped by loss, and reinforced by the victories I had earned not through luck but through resilience. Summer returned, gentle and forgiving. I spent hours in the garden, planting flowers and trimming shrubs. I watched the maple tree stretch skyward, leaves shimmering in the sunlight. It became a metaphor for my own life, steady growth, branching toward new possibilities, roots deep and unwavering. I realized that, like the tree, I could weather storms, seasons of loss, and moments of betrayal, while still reaching toward life and light. One afternoon, I went through Thomas's desk again, the place where I had discovered his letter months before. I opened the drawer, touched the paper, and felt an unexpected surge of gratitude. Gratitude for his foresight, for his love, for the guidance he had left behind. I realized that even in his absence, he had prepared me for this fight, equipping me with lessons I could not have learned any other way. I didn't need revenge anymore. I needed to live fully, and to live fully meant embracing both the sorrow and the joy of what remained. I began writing my own letters, not for the past, but for the future. Letters to myself, letters to Michael, letters for the friends and family who would need guidance someday. I wrote about boundaries, about dignity, about the quiet strength that grief and betrayal reveal when you refuse to be diminished. Writing became a ritual, a way to process my thoughts and to anchor myself in the reality that I had reclaimed. As autumn approached again, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the leaves turn gold and crimson. The house was quiet, serene, full of life that was now entirely mine. The weight of the past year, the funeral, the betrayal, the legal battle, all of it, had not been in vain. I had learned the hard truth about trust, the strength of vigilance, and the necessity of standing firm when others attempt to define your life for you. I understood finally that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the wrongs never happened. Healing is claiming your place in the world again, unapologetically, fully, and with clarity. My daughter-in-law had tried to erase me. My son had faltered under pressure. But I had not faltered. I had stood. And in standing, I had discovered a truth deeper than grief. The life that belongs to you can never truly be taken if you refuse to relinquish it. That night I lit a candle by the window and thought of Thomas. I whispered a quiet thanks for the love we shared, for the lessons he left behind, and for the courage I discovered in defending what was ours. I realized that while betrayal had tested me, it had also revealed me, to myself, to my son, and to anyone else who might watch and understand. Strength, I had learned, is often quiet, unassuming, but unstoppable when called forth by love and loss. As I closed the journal I had been writing in for months, I felt the house settle around me, as if it too had breathed a sigh of relief. The chapter of betrayal and grief had ended. What remained was mine to live fully, deliberately, and without fear. I had survived. I had reclaimed my home, my dignity, and my peace. And in that, I found not just closure, but a quiet triumph that no one could take from me. The house, the garden, the memories, all of it belonged to me. And I belonged to it. Before we close today's story, I want to leave you with a reflection. Life will sometimes test us in ways we never expect, through loss, betrayal, or people who try to take what is rightfully ours. But it is in these moments, when the world seems to conspire against us, that our true strength emerges. Grief may bend you, betrayal may shake you, but they cannot erase you unless you allow it. The lesson here is simple. Stand firm in your truth, honor your boundaries, and never let anyone make you doubt your worth. Protect your life, your home, your peace, and your dignity. Healing doesn't erase the pain, but it shows you that you can survive it, grow from it, and reclaim what is yours. Remember, courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, persistent, and unwavering. And when you reclaim your life, you're not just surviving, you're proving that nothing, not grief, not betrayal, not even loss, can take away the power of your own voice.